April 12, 1945. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, Forward Command Post, Reims, France. General Dwight David Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces in Europe, sits at a map table reviewing the final operational plans for ending the war. The Third Reich is collapsing. German units are surrendering by the tens of thousands. Victory is weeks away, perhaps days. Eisenhower's G3 operations officer, a colonel whose name history didn't preserve, enters the room carrying a field telephone message, flimsy, the thin yellow paper used for urgent communications. He approaches the table. Eisenhower doesn't look up immediately. He's tracing supply routes with a grease pencil, calculating tonnages, planning the occupation. The colonel clears his throat. Eisenhower glances up. The colonel hands him the message. Eisenhower reads it once. Then again, his expression doesn't change, but everyone in the room notices when he sets down his coffee cup. Not casually, carefully, too carefully. The kind of movement a man makes when he's trying very hard to remain calm. He looks at his chief of staff, Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith. Smith has been watching. Smith knows that look. Eisenhower's voice is quiet, almost conversational, but there's steel underneath. He's threatening to what? The message is from 3rd Army Headquarters. General George S. Patton, Jr., commander of the United States 3rd Army, has sent an ultimatum to the Supreme Commander. Not a request, an ultimatum. The content is 12 words long, and those 12 words are about to create the most intense command crisis of the European theater. Patton's lead elements are 60 miles beyond their authorized positions. They're not at the Mulde River, where Eisenhower explicitly ordered them to halt and consolidate. They're 3 miles west of Potsdam. They can see Berlin. And Patton is demanding permission to continue the advance, or he will submit his resignation as 3rd Army commander. Eisenhower looks at Smith. Show me exactly where his lead units are. Exactly. Smith moves to the situation map. The map is updated every 6 hours with unit positions, based on radio reports and liaison officer contacts. Smith's finger traces the 3rd Army boundary. 12 Corps here, sir. XX Corps here. The 2nd Cavalry Group has reconnaissance patrols across the Elbe at Magdeburg. Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division is here, approximately 3 miles west of Potsdam. Eisenhower stares at the map. He measures the distance with his fingers, checking it against the scale. That's 63 miles, in 48 hours. They were supposed to hold at the Mulde River. Smith nods. They were, sir. Apparently General Patton interpreted hold as hold until I can explain why I didn't. Eisenhower picks up the message again. He reads it a 3rd time, as if the words might change. They don't. The message contains Patton's assessment of Berlin's defenses, his estimate of the time required to reach the city center, his logistics situation, and his demand for authorization, or his resignation. One or the other. Eisenhower sets the message down. He looks at the map. The red pencil marks show Soviet positions. Marshal Georgy Zhukov's 1st Belarusian Front is still fighting through the Silo Heights, approximately 30 to 5 miles east of Berlin. The Americans are closer, significantly closer, and Patton knows it. Eisenhower's operations officer speaks carefully. Sir, if I may, 3rd Army's forward momentum is exceptional. Enemy resistance in their sector has effectively collapsed. The Germans are surrendering in divisional strength. If General Patton were authorized to continue, he could reach Berlin's outskirts in 18 to 22 hours. Eisenhower doesn't respond immediately. He's thinking. Everyone in the room can see him thinking. Finally, he looks up. Get me 3rd Army Headquarters, secure line. I'll speak to General Patton personally. If you're learning the untold stories of World War II for the first time, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. This is WW2 War Mind, and we bring you the command decisions, the confrontations, and the conversations that shaped history. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Now, let's get back to April 12, 1945, and the phone call that nearly ended George Patton's career. The secure telephone connection takes 11 minutes to establish. 11 minutes during which Eisenhower reads situation reports, reviews casualty figures, and studies the map. 3rd Army has advanced 63 miles in 48 hours. 63 miles through enemy territory, across rivers, through towns, against an army that's still theoretically fighting. The speed is extraordinary. The coordination is flawless. The aggression is pure Patton. And it's completely unauthorized. The line connects. Eisenhower picks up the handset. His voice is calm, but everyone in the room knows that tone. It's the tone he uses when he's furious, but exercising supreme control. George, I gave you specific orders to halt at the Mulde River and consolidate your positions. You are now 60 miles beyond that line, and I am reading a message that sounds suspiciously like blackmail. There's a pause. Then Patton's voice comes through, slightly distorted by the secure line encryption but unmistakably confident. It's not blackmail, Ike, it's clarity. I'm offering you a choice. We can take Berlin in 48 hours, or you can find someone else to command Third Army. I'm too old to stop winning. Eisenhower closes his eyes briefly. When he opens them, his voice is sharper. This isn't about winning, George. This is about grand strategy. We have agreements with the Russians. The occupation zones are already determined. Berlin is in the Soviet sector. Patton's response comes quickly. Agreements? Ike. Agreements are what you sign when the fighting's over. Right now, I've got 300,000 men who can be in Berlin before Stalin's had his morning vodka. You're telling me we should stop and watch the Russians take it? What happens in 5 years when we realize we handed them the keys to Europe? Eisenhower's jaw tightens. George, the combined chiefs of staff have made this decision. President Truman has approved it. This directive comes from the top. Patton doesn't hesitate. Then get me on the phone with Truman. If he orders me to stop, I'll stop. If he asks me why I'm 60 miles from Berlin, I'll tell him the Germans kept retreating, and I kept accepting their surrender. But if you're telling me to halt for political reasons while we have military capability, then you need a different army commander. Because I didn't spend 3 years fighting across 2 continents to stop within sight of the enemy capital. Eisenhower leans forward. His voice drops. George, don't do this. Don't make me choose between our friendship and my duty. There's a long pause. Then Patton's voice comes back. Quieter, but absolutely firm. Ike, I've made my choice. You make yours. The line goes dead. Patton has hung up. Eisenhower holds the handset for a moment, staring at it as if it might explain what just happened. Then he places it back on the cradle. He looks at Smith. Get me General Bradley. And send a priority cable to the War Department. General Marshall needs to know we have a situation. The message that Third Army sent to Chef contains more than just Patton's ultimatum. It contains the tactical assessment that's driving Patton's demand. According to Third Army G2 intelligence, Berlin's defenses are approximately 40% strength. The regular Wehrmacht units have been pulled east to face the Soviet onslaught. What remains in Berlin's western approaches are Volkssturm militia, Hitler Youth formations, and scattered SS remnants. Patton's intelligence officers estimate that organized resistance would collapse within 72 hours of an American assault. The 4th Armored Division, the 11th Armored Division, and the 6th Armored Division are already positioned. The artillery is registered. The logistics are flowing. The air support is allocated. Everything is ready. One order, one word. Go. And Third Army moves. But that order isn't coming, because Berlin isn't a military objective anymore. It's a political settlement. At the Yalta Conference in February 1945, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin divided Germany into occupation zones. Berlin was placed deep inside the Soviet zone. The agreement was clear. The Soviets would take Berlin. The Americans and British would halt at the Elbe River and wait. The military situation on the ground hasn't changed that political decision, and Eisenhower, as Supreme Commander, is bound by it. But George Patton doesn't think in terms of political settlements. He thinks in terms of enemy capitals and decisive victories. And right now, his forward reconnaissance patrols can see the outskirts of the enemy capital, and he's being ordered to stop. For Patton, this is unthinkable, unacceptable, worth resigning over. Within 3 hours of the telephone call, the situation escalates. Third Army's forward units continue to accept German surrenders. At 1700 hours, Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division reports that an entire German garrison at Brandenburg, 22 miles from Berlin, has surrendered to them. The prisoners total 8,700 men. They include 2 full infantry regiments, an artillery battalion, and a flak regiment. The German commander specifically requested to surrender to the Americans rather than wait for the Soviets. This creates a problem. By accepting the surrender, Patton's forces have expanded their perimeter even deeper beyond the authorized halt line. They're not just holding a position, they're actively expanding the pocket. Patton hasn't just ignored orders. He's continuing his offensive under the guise of accepting surrenders. At 1800 hours, General Omar Bradley telephones Eisenhower. Bradley commands the 12th Army Group, which includes Patton's Third Army. Bradley is Patton's direct superior, and Bradley is not a man who panics. But his voice on the secure line is tight with concern. Ike, I've got a bigger problem than Patton's position. I've got signal intercepts showing he's been in radio contact with British commanders about coordinating an advance on Berlin. He's trying to build a coalition. Field Marshal Montgomery's staff is asking if the British Second Army should align their operations with Third Army's movements. Eisenhower is silent for a long moment. Then he asks the question that defines the crisis. Is he acting alone, or does he have support? Bradley's answer is carefully measured. He's got support from his corps commanders. They believe they can take the city. And privately, Ike, a lot of people at this headquarters think he's right. That's the moment when Eisenhower realizes this isn't just about Patton. This is about the strategic question that will define the post-war world. Should the Western Allies have taken Berlin when they had the chance? In April 1945, at Chef headquarters in Reims, that question isn't theoretical. It's immediate. The forces are in position, the enemy is collapsing, the city is within reach, and one of America's most aggressive commanders is offering to deliver it in 48 hours. All Eisenhower has to do is say yes, but Eisenhower can't say yes, because the decision has already been made at a level far above him, and because saying yes might mean starting a confrontation with the Soviet Union before the war with Germany is even finished. At 2100 hours on April 12, Eisenhower's deputy, British Air Chief Marshal Arthur Tedder, enters the operations room with a decoded cable from Soviet headquarters. The cable is from Marshal Zhukov to Marshal Stalin. American reconnaissance units reported west of Berlin. Request clarification on Allied agreements regarding occupation sectors. The diplomatic implications hit immediately. The Soviets think the Americans are racing them to Berlin, and they're responding by accelerating their own timetable. Tedder sets the cable on Eisenhower's desk. The Russians are moving up their assault schedule. Zhukov's now planning to begin the Berlin offensive on April 16, 48 hours ahead of the original plan. They haven't completed their preparation. Their logistics aren't fully in place, but they're launching early because they think we're coming. Eisenhower looks at Tedder. How many casualties are we talking about? Tedder's voice is quiet. Soviet estimates for the Berlin operation were already high. 80 to 90,000 dead, perhaps 250,000 wounded. If they launch early, without full preparation, those numbers go up significantly. Eisenhower stands. He walks to the window. Outside, the French countryside is dark. The war is almost over. Almost. He turns back to Tedder. George Patton might start World War III by accident. Tedder nods. That's the assessment, yes. Eisenhower makes his decision. Send a flash priority message to Third Army. General Patton is ordered to halt all forward movement immediately. Withdraw to the Mulde River line, no exceptions, no negotiations, and inform General Bradley that if Third Army does not comply, I am prepared to relieve General Patton of command. But Patton hasn't played his final card. What happens next will force Eisenhower to involve the president directly, and it will reveal just how far Patton is willing to go to win this fight. At midnight on April 13th, a reconnaissance report arrives at Schaeff headquarters that changes the entire dynamic. A patrol from the 2nd Cavalry Group, operating east of the Elbe, sends a contact report. They've encountered Soviet reconnaissance units east of Berlin. American and Soviet patrols are within 15 miles of each other, both approaching the same city from opposite directions. The race to Berlin isn't theoretical anymore. It's happening in real time, on the ground, between units that can see each other's positions. The report includes map coordinates, unit identifications, and a tersely worded observation from the patrol leader. Russians appeared surprised to see us, requested identification and mission. Told them reconnaissance only. They withdrew east. No hostile action. Eisenhower reads the report 3 times. Then he asks his intelligence officer a direct question. If Third Army continues their advance and the Soviets continue theirs, what's the probability of contact? The intelligence officer has clearly anticipated this question. He has a map ready, with overlays showing movement rates and approach vectors. Sir, contact is inevitable within 72 hours. Both forces are converging on Berlin. The buffer zone is shrinking by the hour. If neither force halts, they'll meet somewhere in Berlin's western suburbs, probably near Spandau or Charlottenburg. Eisenhower absorbs this. And if that happens? If American and Soviet forces meet in combat conditions, in an urban environment, without clear coordination? The intelligence officer chooses his words carefully. Sir, the risk of a friendly fire incident is extremely high, and the political consequences of such an incident are incalculable. At 0200 hours, Eisenhower places a secure call to General George C. Marshall, Chief of Staff of the United States Army, in Washington. The call wakes Marshall, but Marshall's voice is alert within seconds. He listens as Eisenhower explains the situation. Patton's unauthorized advance, the ultimatum, the Soviet response, the reconnaissance contact, the risks. When Eisenhower finishes, there's a long silence on the line. Then Marshall speaks. Ike, what's your recommendation? Eisenhower has been preparing this answer for hours. Sir, General Patton must be ordered to withdraw to the authorized halt line. If he refuses, he must be relieved of command. We cannot allow a subordinate commander to override strategic policy, regardless of the tactical situation. Marshall's response is measured. I agree, but you need to understand the political situation here. There are members of Congress who will support Patton. There are newspapers that will make him a hero if you relieve him. And there are senior officers who will question whether we're giving up a military advantage for political reasons. You need to be prepared for that fight. Eisenhower's voice is firm. I'm prepared, sir. Marshall pauses. Then I'll inform the president. You have full authority to handle this as you see fit, but Ike, handle it fast. We can't have this playing out in public. What nobody at Chef knows yet is that Patton has already written his letter of resignation. It's sitting on his desk at 3rd Army headquarters in Hersfeld, Germany. The letter is typed on official stationery dated April 13, 1945, and signed in Patton's distinctive handwriting. The letter is 3 paragraphs long. It states that Patton can no longer in good conscience execute orders that he believes are strategically unsound and historically tragic. It offers his resignation, effective immediately, and requests that he be returned to the United States for reassignment or retirement. The letter is in a sealed envelope. Patton's chief of staff knows it exists. Patton's corps commanders know it exists. And they know that Patton is absolutely serious. By dawn on April 14th, Patton's 3rd Army has created a fait accompli. Despite the orders to halt, 3rd Army now controls a corridor 40 miles deep beyond the agreed stop line. They've secured 6 crossing sites over the Elbe River. They've positioned 3 full armored divisions in attack formation aimed directly at Berlin. The 4th Armored Division is at Potsdam. The 11th Armored Division is at Magdeburg. The 6th Armored Division is moving into position near Dessau. The logistics trains are rolling. The fuel dumps are established. The ammunition is stocked. The medical units are positioned. The Signal Corps has laid communications wire. Everything is ready. The entire 3rd Army is coiled like a spring, waiting for one word. Go. General Bradley telephones Patton directly at 0600 hours. The conversation is short and cold. George, you need to stand down. You need to withdraw to the Mulder River line, and you need to do it now. Ike is prepared to relieve you if you don't comply. Patton's response is calm. Brad, I've already taken the position. Are you going to order me to give it back? Bradley's voice hardens. If necessary, yes. Patton is silent for a moment. Then he says something that Bradley will remember for the rest of his life. Brad, I'm offering you Berlin. I'm offering you the capital of the Third Reich. Delivered by American soldiers. Achieved by American arms. Won by American blood. And you're telling me to give it to the Russians because of something Roosevelt agreed to at Yalta? In 10 years, when the history books are written, are you going to be comfortable explaining that decision? Bradley doesn't have an answer. The line stays silent for nearly 30 seconds. Then Bradley speaks quietly. George, Ike is flying to your headquarters this morning. You'll discuss this face to face. Bradley hangs up. At 0900 hours, Eisenhower's C-47 transport lands at Hersfeld Airfield. Eisenhower makes this trip alone. Number staff officers. Number aides. Number witnesses. This is between 2 men who have known each other for decades, who have fought together across North Africa, Sicily, France, and Germany, and who are now on opposite sides of the most important decision of the war's final chapter. Patton meets Eisenhower at the airfield. They shake hands. They don't speak. They drive to 3rd Army headquarters in Patton's Jeep. The drive takes 12 minutes. Neither man says a word. At headquarters, they go directly to Patton's office. Patton closes the door. They're alone. The meeting lasts 47 minutes. No record was kept. No notes were taken. But what happened in that room on April 14, 1945, defines the relationship between strategic vision and tactical opportunity, between command authority and personal conviction, between winning the war and winning the peace. Eisenhower speaks first. His voice is controlled, but there's no mistaking the weight behind it. George, you've put me in an impossible position. I have the President of the United States, the combined Chiefs of Staff, the British Prime Minister, and Joseph Stalin all asking me why American forces are racing for Berlin when we signed agreements that Berlin would be Soviet responsibility. Patton doesn't move. He's standing behind his desk, hands resting on the back of his chair. And in 10 years, Ike, what are we going to say when the Russians own half of Europe and we're explaining why we stopped? We had an agreement. I'm handing you Berlin. I'm handing you the leverage to actually enforce whatever agreements we think we have. Take it. Eisenhower steps closer to the desk. You know I can't. You know the decision's already made. Patton opens his desk drawer. He pulls out the envelope containing his resignation letter. He sets it on the desk between them. Then you accept this, my resignation, effective immediately. I will not order my men to retreat from positions they took in combat because politicians drew lines on maps. Eisenhower stares at the envelope. He doesn't touch it. You're serious. You're actually willing to end your career over this. Patton's voice is steady. I'm willing to end my career rather than betray the men who trusted me to win this war. Completely. Not partially. Completely. Eisenhower walks to the situation map on the wall. The map shows 3rd Army's positions in blue. Soviet positions in red. The gap between them is narrow and shrinking. Eisenhower studies the map for nearly a minute. He traces the approach routes with his finger. He measures the distances, he calculates the timing. Then he turns back to Patton and delivers the words that will define this entire confrontation. George, you're right about the war, you're wrong about history. In 50 years, nobody's going to remember who took Berlin. They're going to remember whether we kept our word. You want to win the battle. I'm trying to win the peace. And I need you to help me do that, even if it hurts you to stop. Patton doesn't respond immediately. He's looking at the map, at the positions his army has taken, at the objective he can see but cannot reach. Finally, he speaks. His voice is quieter now, almost reflective. Ike, I understand what you're asking. I understand the political situation. I understand the agreements. But you need to understand what you're asking me to give up. I have 300,000 men who have fought from Normandy to here. They've endured cold and mud and fire and death. They've lost friends. They've seen things no human should see. And they've done it because they believed we were going to finish this. Completely. And now you're telling me to stop 60 miles short because of a line on a map that Stalin and Roosevelt drew in a room somewhere. How do I explain that to them? Eisenhower's response is immediate. You explain it the same way I'm explaining it to you. We're not stopping because we're weak. We're stopping because we're strong enough to keep our commitments even when it costs us something. That's what separates us from the people we've been fighting. We keep our word, even when it's hard. Patton looks at Eisenhower for a long moment. Then he picks up the envelope containing his resignation letter. He holds it, weighing it. Then he opens his desk drawer and places the envelope back inside. He closes the drawer. You're asking me to trust that this is the right decision. Eisenhower nods. I'm asking you to trust me. Patton's voice is barely above a whisper. I do trust you, Ike. That's why this is so hard. Eisenhower and Patton stand in silence for a moment. Then Eisenhower extends his hand. Patton takes it. They shake. Eisenhower's voice is firm but not unkind. Withdrawal to the Mulde River line. Do it in good order. Make it look professional. Because history is going to judge this moment, and I need it to be clear that we made this choice deliberately, not because we were forced to. Patton nods. It'll be done in 48 hours. Eisenhower turns to leave. At the door, he stops. George, one more thing. When this war is over and we're all looking back, I want you to know that I understand what you're giving up. And I'm grateful. Patton doesn't respond. Eisenhower leaves. Over the next 48 hours, Third Army withdraws to the Mulde River line. The movement is executed with precision. The units pull back in sequence, maintaining security, destroying nothing, leaving no equipment behind. The withdrawal is so disciplined that Third Army's after-action reports will describe it as one of the most professional retrograde movements of the entire war. German prisoners are transferred to rear areas. Crossing sites are secured and marked for potential future use. Reconnaissance screens remain in place. To an outside observer, it looks like a tactical adjustment, not a retreat. But every soldier in Third Army knows what it really is. They know they were within sight of Berlin, and they know they've been ordered to stop. On April 16th, Soviet forces launched their assault on Berlin. Marshal Zhukov's 1st Belarusian Front and Marshal Konev's 1st Ukrainian Front attack from the east and south. The battle is brutal. Berlin's defenders, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, fight with desperate ferocity. The Soviets advance block by block, building by building, room by room. The casualties are staggering. Over the next 16 days, the Battle of Berlin will cost the Soviet Union approximately 80,000 dead and 280,000 wounded. The Germans suffer approximately 100,000 military deaths and an unknown number of civilian casualties. The city is destroyed. When the battle ends on May 2nd, Berlin is a wasteland of rubble and fire and corpses. During those same 16 days, Third Army, holding their positions along the Mulde River 60 miles to the west, suffers 94 casualties. Most of them are from scattered German units attempting to surrender to the Americans rather than face the Soviets. Third Army processes hundreds of thousands of prisoners. German soldiers, and even some civilians, are fleeing west by any means possible. They're trying to reach American lines before the Soviets reach them. The Americans accept the surrenders, process the prisoners, and send them to rear area camps. It's methodical, organized, and comparatively bloodless. In April 1945 alone, Third Army captures 956,000 prisoners of war. The number is so large that logistics officers struggle to handle the volume. Patton never publicly criticizes the decision to halt at the Elbe. In press conferences, in official statements, in communications with the War Department, he supports the decision. But privately, in his diary, he records his thoughts. The entry from April 15, 1945, is brief. We could have taken it. History will show we should have. But I'm a soldier, and soldiers follow orders, even the ones that break your heart. That diary entry will remain private until after Patton's death. On December 9, 1945, 7 months after the confrontation at Hersfeld, Patton is critically injured in a traffic accident near Mannheim, Germany. He dies on December 21st, never having seen whether his prediction about Soviet dominance of Eastern Europe proved accurate. He never saw the division of Germany. He never saw the Berlin blockade. He never saw the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall goes up in August 1961, 16 years after Patton wanted to prevent exactly that outcome. The wall stands for 28 years, dividing Berlin, dividing Germany, and symbolizing the division of Europe into East and West, communist and free. The Cold War, which Patton predicted in 1945, lasts 44 years. When the wall finally falls in November 1989, historians and military analysts begin asking the question that Patton asked in April 1945. Should the Western Allies have taken Berlin when they had the chance? The debate continues. Some argue that taking Berlin would have prevented Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, would have changed the balance of power, would have shortened or prevented the Cold War. Others argue that taking Berlin would have accomplished nothing strategically, would have cost tens of thousands of American lives in brutal urban combat, and might have triggered a military confrontation with the Soviet Union before Germany was defeated. Eisenhower addresses the decision in his post-war memoir, Crusade in Europe, published in 1948. He writes, "Patton was one of the finest combat commanders America has ever produced. His weakness, if it can be called that, was his inability to see that winning the war and winning the peace sometimes require opposite actions. Berlin was such a moment. I needed him to trust me. He did, barely. That word, barely, contains volumes. It acknowledges how close Patton came to refusing the order. It acknowledges how difficult the decision was. And it acknowledges that even in compliance, Patton never truly agreed. The confrontation at Hersfeld on April 14, 1945, reveals two fundamentally different philosophies of military command. Patton represents the warrior ethos. For Patton, victory is defined by territory taken, enemies defeated, and capitals captured. The mission is to destroy the enemy's ability to resist and to occupy their centers of power. Political considerations are secondary to military objectives. The goal is total victory, achieved by force of arms, demonstrated by the capture of the enemy's capital. This is ancient military logic. It's the logic that drove Alexander to Persepolis, Caesar to Alesia, and Napoleon to Moscow. It's the logic that says the war isn't over until you're standing in the enemy's throne room. Eisenhower represents strategic command. For Eisenhower, victory is defined not by the end of combat operations, but by the achievement of long-term political objectives. The mission isn't just to defeat the enemy militarily, it's to create conditions for lasting peace. That requires maintaining alliances, honoring agreements, and thinking beyond the immediate battlefield to the world that will exist after the shooting stops. This is modern strategic thinking. It's the logic that says, capturing Berlin might win the battle but lose the peace. It's the logic that prioritizes stability over symbolism. And in April 1945, Eisenhower is betting everything on the belief that keeping Allied unity intact is more important than capturing one more city, even if that city is Berlin. Both men are right. Both philosophies are valid. And that's what makes the confrontation so profound. This isn't a simple case of one commander being correct and the other being wrong. It's a clash between two legitimate but incompatible visions of what victory means. Patton sees the military opportunity and can't understand why politics should override it. Eisenhower sees the political architecture of the post-war world and can't afford to jeopardize it for a symbolic prize. One is thinking in terms of weeks. The other is thinking in terms of decades. One is focused on the map in front of him. The other is focused on the peace conference that will follow. Neither is wrong, neither is fully right, and that tension defines the decision. The question of whether the Western Allies should have taken Berlin in April 1945 remains one of the great what-ifs of World War II. We know what happened. We know the Soviets took Berlin at tremendous cost. We know the city was divided. We know the wall went up. We know the Cold War lasted 40 years. But we don't know what would have happened if Eisenhower had said yes to Patton. Would it have changed Soviet behavior? Would it have prevented the Iron Curtain? Would it have led to an earlier confrontation between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union? Would that confrontation have remained cold, or would it have turned hot? These questions can't be answered definitively. History doesn't offer controlled experiments. What we do know is this. On April 14, 1945, at 3rd Army Headquarters in Hersfeld, Germany, Two of America's greatest military leaders confronted each other over a decision that would shape the next half-century. One was willing to resign rather than comply. The other was willing to relieve him rather than yield. The confrontation was resolved not through compromise but through trust. Patton trusted Eisenhower enough to withdraw. Eisenhower trusted Patton enough to believe he would do it professionally. And both men trusted that history would judge them fairly, even if they couldn't know what that judgment would be. Patton's prediction about the Cold War proved accurate. His warning about Soviet dominance of Eastern Europe proved accurate. His concern that stopping short of Berlin would create long-term strategic problems proved accurate. But Eisenhower's belief that maintaining Allied unity was essential also proved accurate. The post-war alliance held together long enough to rebuild Europe, contain Soviet expansion, and eventually win the Cold War without another global conflict. Both men were vindicated by history, and both men paid a price for being right. Patton died before he could see whether his warning was heeded. Eisenhower spent the rest of his life defending the decision to halt at the Elbe, knowing that millions of people believed he had made a mistake. This is the story of what Eisenhower said when Patton threatened to resign over Berlin. It's the story of a confrontation that nearly ended one of America's greatest military careers. It's the story of two men who both wanted to win the war, but disagreed fundamentally about what winning meant. And it's the story of a decision that shaped the world we live in today. Whether that decision was right or wrong depends on what you believe victory should look like. Should it look like American soldiers raising the flag over the Reichstag? Or should it look like Allied unity holding together long enough to win the peace? Patton believed the former, Eisenhower believed the latter. And on April 14, 1945, Eisenhower's vision prevailed. If you found this story as compelling as we did, subscribe to WW2 Warmind right now. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell us what you think. Should Eisenhower have let Patton take Berlin? Was Patton right to threaten resignation? These are the conversations that keep history alive. Join the discussion, and we'll see you in the next story.